When a celestial called Zagreb, the aspirant, came to Earth in search for the progenitor, it was infected by the horde and driven mad. The Avengers were successfully able to subdue it thanks to its weakened state. The team buried the cosmic giant under the plains of what would become the modern-day country of South Africa as warning to the others that would come. The Celestials arrived on Earth to exorcise their first host and experimented on the ancestors of humanity. They used Okkara, the living mutant island, as the template for the machine that is Earth, a planetary subdimensional lattice that included an AI omniscient of things Earth. The Celestials collected the Wanderers, a tribe of Homo erectus. Gamenon, the Gatherer, collected the 8 men and sent them to Zeron the Tester, who mutated them to have an unstable genome, creating the deviants, Homo descendus, a race with various mutations, who were then released and went hiding in the caves. With other subjects, Nazar, the calculator, then created the Eternals, Homo immortalis, hairless, upright, tall beings able to tap into the cosmic power. They were themselves released, flying out of the Celestials' laboratory ship. Finally, Oneg the Prober created a latent gene for the expansion of human potential, and those modified yet apparently unchanged 8 men were released. The machine that is Earth served the needs of Eternals, and the Eternals protected the machine as one of their basic principles, alongside protecting Celestials and correcting excessive deviation. As the progenitor's necrofluid entered the ecosystem, it was too noxious and would cause short pockets of superpowered life forms which always fell to extinction. The Eternals' task was to eliminate these pockets, but the really important ones in the Celestials' designs were the deviants, as their malleable forms allowed them to stabilize the fluid over 1,000,000 years. The machine that is Earth was comprised of many smaller machines, including machines of resurrection that could bring the Eternals back to life in new bodies. At that time, the resurrection machines would sacrifice the lives of deviants wherever Eternals had to be resurrected, but as the human population grew, the sacrifices became humans instead. There were precisely 100 Eternals and 100 deviants. Although deviants could crossbreed with any humanoid, the Eternals couldn't breed with each other, so their familial structures were artificially programmed into them. Around this same time, Set had created a new race, the Serpent Men, to be his agents on Earth. They approached the Celestials, but were rejected for experimentation. The Serpent Men then became jealous of the humans and vowed themselves enemies of the human race. The Avengers engaged the Celestials in combat, but were defeated. The Celestials spared them, believing that these heroes would be useful against the Horde when they hatched from the dormant eggs deep within the Earth, buried by the progenitor's crash. The Celestials' final act before departing into space was to appoint a representative from humanity to ensure their race continued to proceed apace in the name of evolution. The Celestials chose one individual and used an object known as the Death Seed to evolve him to become the chosen evolutionary caretaker named Apocalypse. The first Apocalypse was given a second Death Seed so that he could pass on his role after finding a successor. There would be many Apocalypses across the ages. Meanwhile, the Eternals, led by Kronos, secluded themselves in order to secretly protect Earth with their superpowers, while the brutish deviants established an empire in the kingdom of Lemuria. The Celestials sent the Eternal Ajax to make contact with the Avengers, who immediately attacked her as soon as she said the word Celestials. Ajax was resurrected and told the other Eternals to stand down. Over the years, the Avengers fought against numerous time travelers seeking to reshape history to their benefit, such as a young Thanos, some Doctor Dooms, and Mephisto. They also met a time-displaced Tony Stark, who battled Mephisto and used the Devil's Time Stone to go back to his own time. Loki, king of the giants of Jotunheim, met and fell in love with Hive, a being from the negative zone, an antimatter parallel dimension to Earth. The pair produced a swarm of ravenous insects that would have wiped out prehistoric humanity, but were killed by the Avengers, forcing Hive to retreat in shame. Loki, enraged, swore revenge. In this battle, the Black Panther was killed. While Phoenix mourned for him, Odin reminded her that the others were just mortals, and she should not get attached. He attempted to advance on her only to be rejected, as Phoenix was in disbelief of his lack of respect. Phoenix went to the Panther tribe to offer her condolences and was soon called to Asgard, as were the other members of the team. When they arrived, they saw that Odin had called them for an unannounced wedding between him and Phoenix, and that they were to be wed immediately. Disgusted, Phoenix left Asgard and Earth, intending never to return. The botched wedding attempt fractured the team, and they went their separate ways. Afterwards, Asgardians mistreated the Neanderthals. In order to protect them, Odin secretly hired the Angels of Heaven, one of the 10 realms, to protect the humans from the gods. However, Jotunheim paid the angels to devise a strategy against Asgard, and the angels suggested all of Asgard's enemies should form an alliance. The Queen of Angels tried to blackmail Odin into paying her to stop the war before it could begin, but Odin decided that he would pay neither this or what he already owed, preferring that war broke. All realms participated in that war, all against all and against Asgard, with countless and ephemeral alliances made and broken, but none with the Asgardians, as all feared the angels' wrath. At the time, Odin had just had his first daughter, Aldrith, but she was kidnapped as a leverage to stop the war. Odin refused to give in to blackmail yet again, so the Queen of Angels killed Aldrith. Pained, Odin decided to cut loose the 10th realm from the others and from Yggdrasil, and to seal them away. The murder was handled by the Queen of Angels' handmaiden, L'Oreal, but she discovered Aldrith still lived, so she raised the child as one of the angels under the name of Angela. As an adult, Angela became a fierce warrior and leader of the hunt, unaware that any other realms existed. Many years later, the Avengers gathered once more to witness the birth of Thor, the son of Odin and Gaia. Odin sought to father a son whose power would derive from both Asgard and Midgard, and hence he sought to mate with Mother Earth. Odin created a cave in Norway where Gaia gave birth to Thor, with Phoenix acting as her midwife. Months after the infant Thor was weaned, Odin brought him to Asgard to be raised. Odin's wife, the goddess Frigga, acted as Thor's mother from that time onward, and for many years Thor believed her to be his birth mother. Loki, king of the giants of Jotunheim, assassinated the newborn by turning him into ice. Phoenix came back and brought Thor back to life, leaving him permanently imbued with some of her power. Still resentful, Odin told her to leave. Phoenix considered staying to watch the boy grow up, but the sound of storms and his cries were too much for her to bear, and she once again left for the stars. The Avengers were eventually reassembled by Agamotto. Although Phoenix remained missing and the Panther tribe refused Agamotto's call, the team welcomed a newcomer, Moon Knight, the avatar of the moon god Nonshu and leader of his cult. The Avengers journeyed through time to a final battle in the future, which ended with Starbrand, Ghost Rider, and Phoenix dying. While Thor was young, Odin was haunted by the ghost of his father who manipulated him into attacking Loki, king of the giants, according to his supposed wishes. In reality, this ghost was the son of Loki, traveling in time from the future. This Loki met his young self and convinced him to sacrifice his giant parents in order to become a god and achieve immortality. Given information from his future self, the young Loki led his father into a confrontation with Odin, who killed him. Young Loki rushed into the battlefield, faking grief and rage, only to make Odin recognize his strength and to press him to adopt him. Out of a combination of honor, pity, and obligation, Odin adopted the boy, raising him alongside Thor. For all of their childhood, Loki was jealous of Thor. Loki's jealousy, which grew to hatred, resulted in a desire to kill Thor. Thus began Loki's enmity for Thor, which persisted for many centuries. When Thor was 8, Odin bestowed various enchantments upon his hammer Mjolnir, including one that made it impossible for anyone to lift it, except someone who was truly worthy of wielding it. Odin then declared that he was reserving the use of Mjolnir for Thor, who would receive it on the day that great deeds of selfless valor had proved him worthy of its power. For years, Thor strove to become physically strong enough to wield the hammer, and was responsible for many heroic deeds. When Thor was 16, Odin sent him, his brother Balder, and their friend Sif on a quest to teach him what was truly required to wield Mjolnir, which was a pure heart. Thor became Asgard's greatest warrior. Before he was 20, Thor fell in love with Sif. When she was kidnapped by storm giants and ended up as a prisoner of Hela, the Asgardian goddess of death, Thor offered his own life in exchange for Sif's freedom. Hela was so impressed by Thor's nobility that she let both of them go. The romance between Sif and Thor waxed and waned over the centuries. Jealous of Thor and his friends, Loki slipped into Sif's bedroom one night, cutting off her golden locks. As punishment, Thor had dwarves sew Loki's mouth shut. Later, Loki murdered Balder, and when he refused to bring him back from Hel, Thor bound Loki to a rock as a venomous serpent dripped poison on his face. He remained imprisoned as such for many years. The Golden Ones inhabited Mars, living in a golden age until various catastrophes completely destroyed their civilizations. The survivors began living as tribes, which were often hostile to each other and struggled to survive in their harsh environment, and their evolutionary offshoots became the Hither people, the Red Lizardmen, and the Wingmen. These races were encountered by the modern Earthman Gulliver Jones, who was transported through space and time to ancient Mars to be a savior for the natives. Unfortunately, he was unable to help the Hither people, though he and his companions did fight the savage Lizardmen and overthrow the oppressive Technics Guild. Around 750,000 years ago, after encountering a party of Eternals and vivisecting Arlok, the Kree discovered that sentient life on Earth had genetic potential. Intrigued by that potential, the Kree began to experiment on the early humans. At the same time, the Kree experimented on races like the Badoon, the Chameleons, the Centaurians, and many more, such as the Dire Wraiths, an offshoot of the Skrulls who had mutated upon studying too much black magic. The Kree produced Inhumans from all these races, and each one used a different catalyst to unlock new powers. Although their experiments were successful in obtaining a favorable outcome, the Kree abandoned the project after presenting their findings to the Supreme Intelligence. The organic supercomputer foresaw a prophecy of an Inhuman rising from the program and bringing an end to the Kree. He ordered to cleanse the experiments on every world they seeded. In its haste, however, the Supreme Intelligence failed to download the full data packet from the scientists, and 5 worlds of future Inhumans escaped the slaughter: the Badoon, Centaurians, Dire Wraiths, Chameleons, and early humans. The secret of the Inhumans and the prophecy was kept only with the Supreme Intelligence. The surviving Inhuman races were implanted with a genetic memory that would give them the urge to unite together as one people. The genetic memory claimed that the 5 queens would join the one king who returned from the Forever Night and band together in a new holy land, which would be known as New Hela. Around 600,000 years ago, civil war erupted between 2 factions of the Eternals, the side of Kronos, who cherished peace and non-interference, and the side of his brother Uranos, who wanted to use their powers to dominate the planet. Kronos' side prevailed, with the help of Oceanus, and Uranos and his followers were banished. When the 24 exiles landed on planet Uranus, they conquered the Kree outpost there to make of it their new home. As Uranos built a spaceship to return to Earth, Astron refused to follow his ways any longer, and, along with 3 sympathizers, remained on Uranus, where they created their own colony. The spaceship was then destroyed by a Kree fleet investigating the invasion of their outpost, thus leaving only 7 Eternals alive. Those that survived decided to abandon their plans for revenge, and instead created a colony on Saturn's moon Titan. Meanwhile, the surviving Eternals on Uranus encountered the native Uranians. Recognizing them as exiles, the Uranians allowed the remaining Eternals to live with them, under the condition that, if they ever left their enclosed environment, they would face destruction. At some point, the Titanians fell to warlike tendencies once more. As a result, the colony of Titan was ravaged by yet another civil war, thereby causing the death of all its residents save for the woman Suisan, who lived in isolation. Back on Earth, the Deviants also developed advanced technology and created new races such as the Subterraneans and huge monsters that would lay dormant until modern times. Around 500,000 years ago, Kronos managed to isolate the cosmic energy that empowered the Eternals, but the volatile containment tube shattered and exploded. The explosion transformed Kronos into a cosmic entity, but also killed all the other Eternals and brought the city of Titanos to the ground, almost destroying the machine, the artificial intelligence that serves the Eternals. After being reborn in the activation chamber, the Eternals contained the anomaly generated by the explosion, and discovered that Kronos' experiment had increased their powers. With their new abilities, the Eternals then discovered they could join their will and intelligence into one powerful entity, which they called the Unimind. While the Eternals continued to seclude themselves, the Deviants had their kingdom of Lemuria stolen from them by the Dragon Lords, other descendants of Set, alongside the Serpent Men. The Dragon Lords ruled over Lemuria and the lands known as Hyperboria, beginning what was called the Age of Dragons. Despite being more unified than ever before, the Eternals still disagreed on the core goals of their society. The majority of the Eternals, led by one of Kronos' quote-unquote sons, Zuras, believed that they shouldn't tinker with their cosmic potential and no new Eternals should be created. Another son of Kronos, Lars, and a small fraction of their numbers believed they should keep expanding the machine and create new Eternals via biological and technological methods. Around 200,000 years ago, war erupted once more, but eventually an agreement was reached. One solitary Larsite was allowed to found a colony as an experiment. Lars was chosen and adopted the name Mentor before settling on the lost colony of Titan. There he located the lone Suisan, and together they used technology to found a new species of eternal-derived beings, the Titans. They developed Titan into a wonder of science, building the supercomputer Isaac to help them run the environment. 100,000 years ago, Lemuria was where men first rose to supremacy. At that time, the rest of the world lived in the Pleistocene, and was inhabited by Neanderthal or Cro-Magnon men, with the exceptions already mentioned, such as Kunlun, Wakanda, and others. Seeing the Dragon King's evil, a group of gods known as the 19 Gods created a race of artificial humans in Lemuria, beginning with Fondath, the first Both, and his mate, Ivala. Men built Nemetis, the first city, and fought the Dragon Kings for dominance over Lemuria during the 1,000-Year War before being forced to retreat behind their city's walls. Thungarth was eventually approached by the deity Gorm, who offered him the Star Sword, imbued with the power of the 19 Gods, giving men the strength to destroy the Dragon Kings at Grimstrand Firth, leading to the end of the Age of Dragons and the beginning of the Age of Men. In northern Lemuria, the Blackhawk and Snowbear tribes clashed, causing their mutual destruction save for Blackhawk tribe member Thongor, son of kingly Thumitar. Thongor became a famed barbarian and battled 1,000 foes before slaying the last surviving dragon lords. The goddess Gaia had children with the primeval sky god Ouranos, siring the Titans. Ouranos was very proud of the Titans for their physical perfection, but Gaia had other children, known as the Cyclopes and the Hecaton Curies. Ouranos hated his other children and exiled them into the other dimensional world of Tartarus. Grieving, Gaia called upon one of her sons to depose Ouranos and free their siblings from the underworld. None of her sons would raise a weapon against Ouranos except for Kronos, the youngest of the Titans, who used a sickle to castrate Ouranos and dismember his corpse. The dying Ouranos prophesied that Kronos would be overthrown by one of his own sons. Kronos married Rhea, seized Olympus, and ruled over ancient Greece, but he neglected to free the Cyclopes or the Hecatoncheires. Upon the birth of each of his own children, Kronos had the infant imprisoned in Tartarus. The offspring he sent there were Hades, Poseidon, Hera, Demeter, and Hestia. Appalled at the mistreatment of their children, Rhea concealed her sixth pregnancy from him, secretly gave birth to Zeus, and hid him on the island of Crete. Zeus grew to adulthood among the shepherds of Mount Ida, and then set about taking revenge on Kronos. Zeus went down into Tartarus and freed his siblings, the Cyclops and the Hecatoncheires. The Cyclops provided the young Olympians powerful weapons to defeat the Titans, giving Poseidon the trident of Neptune, Hades the helm of Hades, and Zeus the powerful thunderbolts. The young Olympians and his allies fought a 10-year war with the Titans known as the Titanomachy, which ended with Zeus' victory. The Titans were imprisoned in Tartarus, and the Hecatoncheires were made their guards. Following their final victory, the three brothers divided the world among themselves. Zeus was given Olympus and was recognized as overlord. Poseidon was given the oceans of earth, where Hades was given Hades, the realm of the dead. He was tasked with guarding the Titans for all eternity. Zeus sent out 2 eagles to mark the boundaries of his dominion. Where they met was declared the center of the world, and this location he condemned the Titan general Atlas to hold the heavens aloft as the Axis Mundi. The continent where he stood was christened Atlantis, which simply meant the Isle of Axis. After the rise of the Thurian continent and Atlantis, Lemuria shifted from being considered the only civilized part of the world to one of its most barbarian nations. In 51,845 BC, beings called those who sit above in shadow enslaved the Asgardians in a cycle called Ragnarok, condemning Asgard to be destroyed in 2,160 years, only for it to be reborn with slight differences, beginning the cycle again. Those who sit above in shadow claim to have created the Asgardians and that they lived off the energies released with each Ragnarok cycle, but they were possibly created by the Asgardians instead, as myths which became reality, or were even beyonders. Another theory is that they were part of the race of eldritch demons called primal gods. The general sequence of events for a Ragnarok is preceded by 2 major events. First, a bitter, unrelenting winter known as the Fimbul Winter will blanket Asgard, causing widespread fear and paranoia. Driven to the point of madness by the oncoming Ragnarok, infighting will break out across the land, with friend attacking friend, and brother attacking brother. Secondly, Loki will trick the blind god Hodor into killing Balder with a mistletoe. Heimdall will sound his horn, officially signaling the beginning of Ragnarok. An army of trolls and giants led by Loki will charge across the Bifrost on their way to Asgard. After destroying the Rainbow Bridge, Heimdall will be swallowed by the invading horde. Odin will lead a counterattack, and a final cataclysmic battle will begin. As Asgard crumbles around them, Thor and Loki will meet each other in combat for one final time. But their fight will be interrupted by the sudden appearance of the Midgard serpent. Though Thor will succeed in slaying the Midgard serpent, the whole realm of Asgard will be torn asunder, leaving it in ruins. From Muspelheim will rise Surtur, the fire demon, who will proceed to burn what remains of Asgard to cinders. In 50,000 BCE, the technologically advanced human civilization of Attilan, the Island of Gods, joined the mosaic of existing humanities. At some unclear point, the kingdoms of Camelia, Valusia, Varulia, Grandar, Thule, Comoria, and Zarfana became known as the 7 Empires, and were considered the rulers of the period. Set Serpent's men ruled Valusia and Atlantis for a period, but were eventually kicked out. In 49,685 BCE, the first Ragnarok occurred, ending the Asgardian civilization. All of them were born again, from Thor to Loki, with slight differences. Only Odin remembered the past era and began attempting to break the hold those who sit above had on his people. In 47,525 BCE, the second Ragnarok occurred, ending and rebirthing the Asgardian civilization again. This incarnation of Thor was a ruthless warrior who had little time or interest in the revelry of his fellow Asgardians, who during this cycle lived opulent and hedonistic lifestyles between battles. The people of Asgard were not immortals, but enjoyed an extended lifespan and vitality from the golden apples that came from the world tree Yggdrasil, which were picked by the enchantress. While the other warriors gorged on these apples, Thor rationed his, choosing only to consume a supply before going into battle. Following a battle against an army of frost giants, won thanks primarily to Thor, a frost giant posing as a mortal human offered to fix the gates of Asgard, promising to complete the task within 6 months. If he succeeded, he would be given the enchantress as a bride. Odin accepted this bet thanks to coaxing from Loki. When the giant nearly succeeded, he was denied and he revealed himself. When he attempted to attack, Thor slew the giant. In 30,245 BCE, the 10th Ragnarok occurred, ending and rebirthing the Asgardian civilization again. Like during the third Ragnarok cycle, Loki tricked the enchantress into willingly becoming the bride of the leader of the frost giants. When the Asgardians realized this, and that they were cut off from the power of the golden apples, they attempted to get more from Thor, but he refused them. Thor did not act until Loki attempted to save the enchantress and was hunted by the ruler of the giants. Thor slew the frost giant, though he was none too impressed with how careless his fellow Asgardians had been. What followed was a long and bloody war against the frost giants where Thor battled alongside Balder, Loki, and the Warriors Three. Seeking revenge against the gods of Asgard, a clan of dwarves used one of their own who resembled Thor to frame him for slaying his fellow gods. Thor was presumed guilty by all, including his father, after an investigation was carried out by the Warriors Three. Thor soon found himself an outlaw. However, the warriors' investigation enabled Thor to determine who was responsible for framing him. He found the leader of the dwarves and slew his impostor. Although Thor began assisting his father in battling Surtur, he still held a grudge against his father and his people for being quick to condemn him for crimes he had not committed. Growing fed up with this, Thor decided to leave Asgard. He spent the next 4 years living in a small village on Earth. He took on the name Tor and began a relationship with a widow named Atali, helping her raise her son Elof. Although he lived the life of a simple farmer, he frequently came to defense of the village from marauders. His peace and tranquility was quickly ended when Balder came seeking his aid in helping repel Surtur once again. After succeeding in forcing Surtur back to his realm, Thor had no interest in returning to Asgard and returned to his wife. However, upon his arrival, Thor found that Elof had died of a plague, and Atali was in the final stages of the illness. She told Thor to go to her sister before dying herself, but Thor found that none of Atali's family had survived. After using his godly might to repel another army of invaders, Thor came to realize that he could no longer call Midgard home, and grudgingly returned to Asgard. More than 30,000 years ago, Cthulhu was born in Atlantis. He became a mad wizard, full of hatred towards Atlantis because it spurned his wizardry. Intending to destroy Atlantis, Cthulhu forged a chimera, endowed it with the power of the cosmic eternal, and called upon ancient gods to rain blackness and death onto Atlantis before he was slain. Nearly 25,000 years ago, the Kree experimented on Earth humans despite their supreme intelligence having cancelled that project, creating the Earth Inhumans in Homo Supremis. The Inhumans settled in ancient Attilan, although there are contradictory accounts that they founded it despite the city existing 50,000 years ago. Tuk, first offspring of the Inhumans, lived among the mortals. His unique genetic code, passed down through generations, increased ordinary humans' susceptibility to mutation. Zuras, leader of the Eternals of Olympia, monitored Attilan's progress over the millennia, long observed the Inhumans, and admired their capacity for leadership. In Atlantis, a group of powerful beings joined together as the Order of the Midnight Suns, also known as the Spirits of Vengeance, to oppose the demon Zarathos. Along with a similar group known as the Blood, They battled Zarathos and his forces. At the same time, Lilith, ex-wife of Adam, was present in Atlantis, participating in the creation of the first vampire, Varney. A sorcerer from Atlantis, he underwent a ritual using the Dark Hold, a book where the elder god, Chthon, wrote all his evil works and spells. Varney was transformed into the first ever vampire. He was the progenitor of the entire vampire race, and therefore their lord. Unable to fully defeat Zarathos, the Order of the Midnight Suns instead forced the demon into the Medallion of Power, an object Zarathos had sought to control. Unfortunately, the Order was also trapped within the medallion, leaving the blood to shatter the mystical talisman in order to prevent others from seeking it. The blood member caretaker took possession of the pieces and passed them on over the centuries to the members of two bloodlines. Those recipients would often seek vengeance against injustice as ghostwriters. Earth became ruled by sorcery rather than by science, and wizards dominated the world. Along with other sorcerers, the being who became known as the Dark Rider ruled tyrannically over mankind from their towers of magic, until they revolted, attacked the towers, and slew all the wizards except the Dark Rider. The Isle of Atlantis became a wilderness, with no true rulership, but barely tamed by barbarians. However, by 19,000 BCE, Atlantis recovered into being the seat of a minor empire based on trade and crafts, whose fortunes fluctuated over the next centuries. Circa 18,500 BC, Kull was born in Atlantis. He would go on to become the king of Valusia and the greatest king seen in 100,000 years, battling the Comoria, the elder race sorcerers Thulsa Doom and Tuzunthun, the Serpent Men, and Oris Dejmal and his cult, among others. For a time, Thulsa Doom usurped the throne of Valusia, posing as Ardian and wearing the serpent crown, a vessel for Set's power. An Atlantean named Sarna used a spell to lift Atlantis out of barbarism, and Om-Ra was its king. However, Sarna's passing also ended his spell, and later King Kuvar led his tribe to wipe out half of the population of Atlantis, and united the other half under his absolute rule, self-styling himself an emperor. When Kuvar attempted to force himself on a woman named Irena, she slew him and took the crown for herself before she was killed by Kull. Kull eventually took back his throne, and his second reign was a golden age until Kull died under unrevealed circumstances, passing on to legend. Over the next few centuries, Atlantis became shared by humans, Kentauros, Gorgons, Gremlins, Leprechauns, and Elves, among other beings. Eventually, Poseidon claimed Atlantis and married the goddess Cleito. They fathered 10 Atlantean kings, gods ruling their province and overseen by Cleito, known in legends as the 10 crowned saints. In this golden age, Atlantis wasn't a single kingdom, but 10 unified kingdoms with the city of the Golden Gate as their capital. While on Atlantis, Poseidon seduced Medusa Gorgon, a chaste priestess of Athena. They mated on the altar of Athena. Enraged, Athena cursed the Gorgon family, turning them into snake-haired creatures. From their perfection of magic and their domination of commerce, the ruling classes of Atlantis grew indolent, unwilling to fight their own battles. Atlantis, now a decadent nation, hired Marina's Amazons to root out the nest of Gorgons. The Amazons left a garrison behind to collect the payment, but were slain, as the Atlanteans hated the warrior women and wanted to avoid payment, thus earning the eternal hatred of the Amazonian nation. Around this time, Lilith was imprisoned inside the corpse of the dragon-like Tiamat or Leviathan by Atlantean mages. Another account states that her remains were scattered across the earth by 3 angels, but regardless, her disembodied life essence was free to wander on earth, allowing many of her later actions to be performed by her wandering spirit while her body remained trapped. Eventually, the deviants bred like rabbits and took over the world, enslaving humanity. As the deviants subjugated most other lands, Atlantis became one of the few strongholds of humanity, and reached its highest culture after the fall of Valusia. But by 18,000 BC, under the rule of Camus and his wife Zartra, a Lemurian refugee, Atlantis declined as well, and was embroiled with civil war to the point of being weakened enough to be targeted by the deviants. The Eternals fought against them, but when they realized their numbers couldn't compare to the millions of deviants, they had no alternative but to call the Celestials. When the second host of Celestials finally arrived on Earth, they were attacked by the deviants, led by the Emperor Frog. Seeing a world fallen into chaos, the Celestials soon delivered their judgment and wiped out most of the deviants. In the process, they caused Lemuria and Atlantis to sink all the way to the bottom of the ocean floor. In a general way, all of civilization, both deviant and human, was wiped off the face of the earth. Other reasons provided for the cataclysm say, an Atlantean council of sorcerers tried to harness a fraction of the power of the Axis Mundi, the connection between heaven and earth, and another name for Yggdrasil, but were unable to control the energies. It was caused by the sea gods of Lemuria. It was caused by the sea god of Mu. It was caused by the Anunnaki god Dagon. It was caused by the Christian god Yahweh. It was caused by the mysterious Land the Sorcerer, who appeared on earth every 10,000 years, was neither a demon nor a god, and was dedicated to make humanity destroy itself. It was caused by a species of self-replicating silicon-based extraterrestrial robotic spiders who arrived on Earth with the mission to cause the flood, but refused, and their attempt became exaggerated and mythologized into the tale of the flood. The most recent account states it was caused by Neptune, who disliked that the Atlanteans waged war in the name of the gods of the surface, so he sank them to make them worship him and kill for him. Regardless, the eternal Utnapishtim built an ark in order to save some human beings as well as animals from the flooding. Later, Icarus came to guide them to a mountaintop, where the survivors could disembark to restart society. During the second host, the celestial Tiamat was ready to call the Horde to begin the harvesting of the planet. However, Arishem had that order cancelled and had many of the deviants called, while not touching the other species. As this was a violation of their protocol, Tiamat deemed Arishem to be malfunctioning and tried to assume command by attacking him. Although Tiamat won, he was then attacked by 4 other Celestials who had been working with Arishem, and was imprisoned underneath the Pyramid of the Four Winds, left in the care of the eternal Vulcan. From then on, that Celestial became known only as the Dreaming Celestial, as he laid to rest for thousands of years. As a result of the cataclysm caused by the Celestials, technology was lost to the human race for millennia, and they reverted to barbarism. New empires arose: Acheron, Stygia, Kite, and Vendia. The descendants of Thurian refugees, who had devolved into barbarism, were now called Hybori, and by 16,000 BCE, led by Bori, they repelled the savage snow apes from the far north, and that area became the Hyborian homeland. The Hybori prospered into their new habitat as nomads dwelling in tents, until an unchronicled genius discovered the use of stone to build mighty keeps. 1,500 years after Bori's time, the Hybori had a fairly high level of culture. With the Hybori population increasing, they conquered and absorbed weaker tribes. They eventually founded Hyperboria the Elder, the first of the Hyborian kingdoms, as Guardian activity was recorded during this period. 15,000 years ago, a group of mutants banded together due to their physical appearance resembling that of demons and, calling themselves Neaphem, were ruled by the mutant Azazel, who battled Mephisto for the right to the title of Satan and began calling himself that. They established a mutant civilization, but were eventually repelled to another dimension by the Shayaraphim, another early group of mutants who looked like biblical angels. 13,000 years ago, Randak was king of the Inhumans. Randak was responsible for discovering the Terrigen mists, the catalyst for the Inhumans to unlock random new powers. Subjecting himself to immersion in the Terrigen mist, Randak gained godlike powers through the activation of the latent mutant genes carried by all Inhumans. A Kree sentry examined Randak and judged that the Kree's goals were reached. The Terrigenesis concept provoked a schism in the Inhumans, followed by a second schism when the Terrigenesis kept creating radically non-human mutations, so access to it was restricted. Many groups of Inhumans departed Attilan at various dates, to different continents and to space. Circa 10,000 BCE, Conan the Cimmerian, a descendant of Kull, became an unintentional champion of humanity, and later became king of the land of Aquilonia. Conan fought alongside Red Sonja, a member of a group of red-haired people called the Favored, who were created by the red goddess Skatshach. These people were granted supernatural strength and skill with weapons for the purpose of slaying the Dramach, flesh-eating man-beasts that inhabited the caves of the Favored. Conan and Sonja battled the immortal cannibal sorcerer Kulangath, worshipper of the demon Shumagorath. After many years of ruling Aquilonia, Conan abdicated in favor of his son Khan, and departed across the Western Ocean to investigate mysterious forces which menaced Aquilonia and discover new lands to explore. His ultimate fate was not recorded. When searching for a new sorcerer supreme to replace himself, Agamotto asked the great wizard aged Genghis for assistance. Genghis recommended to hold a battle between all of Earth's mightiest mages, the time of the Vishanti, to determine the next sorcerer supreme. Aisha of Balabidu emerged as the champion. At the twilight of the Hyborian era, the Hybori overextended their empire, and Picts overwhelmed its frontiers, and the disgruntled soldiers of annexed peoples revolted. Fire and sword brought down the empire. Its former rivals and territories were conquered by northern invaders. In 9500 BCE, another cataclysm, described simply as a terrible convulsion of the earth, toppled the existing civilizations and formed the current earth. In the same period, a meteorite holding gamma radiation fell in what is now modern-day Jordan, contaminating the area and causing droughts and famines. The village elder worshipped the meteorite as a god, and when the young Tammuz protested, he was fed to the meteorite as a human sacrifice. Sucked into it, Tammuz saw a vision of a green door being opened, unable to understand that he was witnessing a gateway to the below place, realm of the one below all. Tammuz was transformed into a primitive Hulk known as Enkidu, and he made a pact with the one below all and agreed to cause destruction. Enkidu took revenge on his tribe and wandered the earth as an immortal. At the end of the Hyborian Age, the Olympian gods sought worshippers. Zeus lay Mount Olympus near the eternal city of Olympia, thereby deciding that the Olympians would be worshipped by the people of the land now known as Greece. While meeting with the Eternals, the Olympians soon noticed the physical similarities between them, as seen with the comparison of Zoras with Zeus and of Athena with Azura. As a result, they decided to form a pact. The Eternals themselves would act as the gods' representatives on Earth, and Azura herself took on the name of Athena in order to seal the pact. However, an unintended consequence of this treaty was that, over the years, many humans would come to think that the Eternals were the real Olympian gods. Circa 8250 BCE, the man later known as Ulysses Bloodstone was born in the area later known as Scandinavia. This man was amongst the best hunters in his tribe. During an expedition, Bloodstone noticed a falling meteorite that he decided to investigate. The apparent meteorite was really a power object called the Blood Gem, a blood-red gemstone created by the evil elders of a different chaos-based continuum as a weapon to conquer and transform other continuums into copies of theirs, particularly because it would allow them to travel to these other places. The blood gem encased an evil life form called the Hellfire Helix. The elder gods needed the helix to create 5 guardians for the dimension-crossing ritual and ordered the Exomind to create the first of these, Uluxul Quan Te Sin. But the Exomind was uninterested in its creator's goals, and it sabotaged the process so that the other guardians would not be created. During this time, many extraterrestrials came to Earth. Among these were the caretakers of Arcturus, who created the first werewolves. The caretaker named Mahayogi witnessed as Uluxul Quan Te Sin battled Ulysses Bloodstone. This battle shattered the magical blood gem, which broke into fragments, granting the wearers amongst these Ulysses immortality. Taking one of these fragments, Mahayogi gained elongated life. Because the gem shattering killed Ulysses' tribe, the hunter devoted his long life to chase Uluxul, blaming him and the evil master he served for the death of his tribe. As Ulysses was trying to find the fragments of the blood gem to rebuild it, the hunter made an effort to stop this scheme. However, this was all part of the gem's evil scheme to obtain mobility through a host and observe mankind's evolution. Even Ulysses' role as his nemesis was an excuse so that Ulysses would travel around the world and be knowledgeable with every aspect of civilization and mankind, and as such, Ulysses was tasked with sending monsters against the hunter. The gem carefully clouded the hunter's mind with an obsession for revenge so that he believed that Ulysses was the mastermind behind all his problems. The living island of Okkara eventually became a home for the second generations of mutants on Earth. Iska was born over 10,000 years ago, and by that time she already had an older sister, Genesis. In 5000 BCE, Aisha, the Sorcerer Supreme, voluntarily stepped down. She asked the aged Genghis to find a next Sorcerer Supreme, so a new competition was held. Hermes Trismegistus won and succeeded Aisha. The robe of evil was a patch-worn garment that had apparently been created by the devil himself. Its first appearance in recorded history was when it surfaced in ancient Egypt when it was in the possession of a tyrant named Hyksos, who conquered much of the land and caused countless murders and pillaging before he died. In 4325 BCE, the 22nd Ragnarok occurred, ending and rebirthing the Asgardian civilization. During the 23rd Ragnarok cycle, Thor slew a frost giant to save the life of the enchantress. The giant's daughter came seeking reparations from Odin. Thor was present when Odin agreed to present 3 gifts to the female frost giant and sent Loki to Nidavellir to have them constructed by dwarves known as Grer, Alfrig, and Dvalin. One of these items was a sword that could slay frost giants, and Odin used it to kill the frost giant. The dwarves then returned to Nidavellir with the other 2 items, a golden armband and necklace. The enchantress sought to claim the necklace for herself, and had sex with the dwarves in order to claim it for her own. When Odin discovered this, he angrily took the necklace from her. Furious at this affront, the enchantress put a curse, raising the dead, and unleashed them upon Midgard. Thor was sent to Midgard to defend Odin's followers. He traveled there on his chariot pulled by his horses, Slaughterbit, Swamptooth, Snow Harpy, and Warhoof. Thor then had his followers make a number of sacrifices so that he could control the massive blood colossus, warning the humans not to eat his horses no matter how hungry they became. After Thor destroyed the army of the dead, he found that the people had disobeyed his command and had eaten his horses. Thor angrily caused massive flooding to the land of his followers before returning to Asgard. There, Thor used magic to create a new horse, the mighty Sleipnir. Giving into his rage, Thor began waging war across the 9 worlds of Asgard. Over the next 40 days and nights, Thor shattered the roots of Yggdrasil, spat in the well of Mimir, laid waste to Jotunheim, struck Midgard with floods and famine, and waged war on both Svartalfheim and Hel. This so angered Odin that he commanded Brunhild and the Valkyrie to stop Thor's rampage. The Thunder God was brought low as he battled in the realm of Niflheim. However, this attempt to apprehend Thor quickly ended when a massive frost giant attacked them, and Thor helped vanquish the creature. Afterward, abandoning his previously dislike for revelry, he celebrated his victory with the Warriors 3 and the Valkyrie, much to the anger and irritation of Odin. Odin easily bested Thor in combat and then stripped him of his godly stature, sending him to Earth in the mortal guise of Arkin Torsen, a village doctor with a lame leg who required a walking stick to move about. This, Odin hoped, would teach his son humility. Around 3100 BCE, the Eternal Machari taught the Egyptians how to write, using the name Thoth. In 3056 BCE, a man named Hercules was active in ancient Egypt. He freed a young boy named Bukalag from the slave driver Phao Notash. Phao cursed Hercules, promising that he and Buka would be born again and have a rematch before he died from his wounds. Afterwards, Hercules took Buka on as a sidekick, naming him Bucky. Hercules and Buka had many adventures before they too met the grave. Somewhere between 3000 BCE and 2000 BCE, a spacecraft landed in ancient China piloted by Makulans, shape-shifting aliens from Kakaranthara, also known as Maklu 4, a planet in the star system Maklu of the Andromeda Galaxy. The crew used their natural shape-shifting powers to mimic human form, intending to enter human society and bide their time before conquering the planet. The navigator of the craft, Fin Fang Foom, instead elected to serve as a backup in case something went wrong, and was placed in a tomb and given a herb that would send him into a deep slumber, so that he might sleep while his crew entered man's world. As centuries passed, Lilith ruled many kingdoms directly, through her lovers or through her children. She dedicated much of her time to conceiving powerful lines of children, including the Lilin, the Jinn, the Incubi, and the Succubi. Her lovers, husbands, and or consorts supposedly included the angel Shemhazai, the fertility god Attis, the Olympian god Zeus, and even the Christian god. Her enemies included many famous figures, some of whom were also tricked into fathering more children for her. Circa 3000 BCE, Lilith opposed the eternal Gilgamesh, king of Uruk, in Sumeria. The mighty Eternal roamed the earth, aiding ordinary human beings by overthrowing tyrants and slaying dangerous beasts. Somehow unaware of his membership to the Eternals, he quested for eternal life. He was often mistaken with, and consequently known as, Samson and Hercules. In the 30th century BC, Egypt was ruled by Pharaoh Amenhotep, Khufu. His kingdom was besieged by the Gurban. Their invasion was thwarted by the Dynaman, a hero from the dead civilization of Korug. Nathaniel Richards was born in the 30th century of Earth 6311, a reality where humanity never went into the Dark Ages. As an adult, Nathaniel grew bored of the peaceful world he lived in and soon became infatuated with the heroic age of Earth 616. Richards began researching his background and learned he had a possible biological link to Nathaniel Richards, father of Reed Richards. Through his research, he uncovered the abandoned fortress of his namesake and uncovered its many weapons, machines, and a fully functional time platform. With it, Nathaniel built his own time machine and, deciding to travel to ancient Egypt, constructed it to resemble a sphinx. The time machine sent Nathaniel back in time to Egypt circa the year 2960 BCE. His ship crashed in the desert, and a blinded and injured Nathaniel was found by Baal and his band of sandstormers who lived in the desert. They recovered him from the ship and nursed the wounded man back to health. Although blinded in the crash, Nathaniel eventually fled into the desert, leaving behind devices that held information about the coming birth of the world's first mutant, known as En-Sabah-Nur. Using an army of robots and weapons from his time ship, Nathaniel easily took over the kingdom of Egypt, renaming himself Ramatut. Learning of a radioactive herb, Rama used it to restore his lost vision shortly thereafter. Rama had the people of Egypt come to worship him, build massive statues in his honor, and reject the old gods. Unknown to Ramatut at the time, this angered the Egyptian vengeance god Khonshu. It is likely during this period that Ramatut trapped the ancient vampire Amenhotep within a pyramid built in his name. At some point during his reign, Ramatut impregnated a slave woman who bore a son named Ramades, whom Ramatut abandoned. Weeks later, a mutant was born as a member of Clan Akaba in Akaba. His gray skin and blue lines running across his lips and face inspired fear, and he was abandoned by the tribe to die. However, he was found by the sandstormers. Baal found the infant and recognized he might be the child prophesied to dethrone Ramatut, naming him En-Sabah-Nur, literally meaning the morning light, and raising him as his own son. Nur believed in the principle that Baal and the tribe lived by, that only the fittest, toughest, most ruthless and pitiless, tested by hardship, would and should survive. On the day of his tribal rite of passage into manhood, the 17-year-old Nur killed 3 armed warriors of the tribe using only his bare hands, and Baal explained to him that Ramatut was no god, as most believed, but a man who had arrived to Egypt in a sphinx. Baal brought the young Nur to a sacred cave, but when Baal was killed by a cave-in, Nor swore to avenge his father by taking on the pharaoh. This was a nexus point in time when many time-traveling superheroes were visiting. The Time Guardians sent the biologically engineered assassin Killpower into the past to retrieve a portion of the Chronofact, a device that threatened the Guardians' very existence. Ramatut tricked Killpower into attacking Samira, a sorceress who opposed his rule. However, Samira convinced Killpower that Ramatut was the real enemy. He was joined by the group known as Genetics, who were also traveling to the past to retrieve him from that era. Ramatut fled, inadvertently leading them to the Chronofact. When Killpower reclaimed it, everyone teleported away, but Tut got something out of it by using his high-tech weapons to absorb the chronal energy they left behind. The next group of time travelers from the heroic era came from the West Coast Avengers, who traveled to 2940 BCE with a time machine that could only bring them backwards in time. They had hoped to use Rama's technology to return to their own era. Their arrival was noticed by Ramatut, but the god Khonshu, who resented Rama's takeover, used his magics to make the Avengers appear as though they were simple Egyptian peasants. Rama quickly subdued them and had their bodies placed in the temple of Khonshu to die. The Avengers were revived by Khonshu under the promise they would oust Ramatut in exchange for getting word of their predicament to their comrades in the modern era. Soon after, the Fantastic Four arrived in this era, searching for the radioactive herbs that cured Ramatut's blindness so they could restore the sight of their friend Alicia Masters in the present. Rama's guards, with the help of Ramatut's ultra-diode ray, managed to defeat and capture the Fantastic Four. Yet another time traveler, the Sorcerer Supreme Dr. Strange, arrived in this era seeking the soul shard of his friend Morgana Blessing before it could travel back to the dawn of time and destroy humanity's ability to dream. Strange was quickly subdued by Ramatut's robots, but still managed to freely roam the area in his astral form. Meanwhile, the Fantastic Four were brought before Ramatut, who decided to enslave the male members and make the Invisible Girl his bride, using a device to sap her mind. While the Fantastic Four were forced into enslavement, the West Coast Avengers clashed with Ramatut's forces to try and get access to his time machine. Dr. Strange soon found Nefri, Ramatut's first promised wife, as she was preparing the Invisible Girl for her forced wedding, and found that Morgana's soul shard was within her. Calling out to Nefri, Strange convinced her to free his physical body. While she did that, Strange secretly used his mystical powers to free the Fantastic Four's thing from captivity. Meanwhile, En-Sabah Nur became a slave, but when he was thrown into a pit of snakes, his mutant powers activated. Nur grew in size and strength, taking on the name Apocalypse. However, by the time he got free, Rama's kingdom was already beginning to crumble. The Thing freed his comrades, and they chased after Ramatut, who fled back to his own era in his time machine. The Fantastic Four recovered the radioactive herb they needed and returned to their own era. The Avengers trapped in this era missed stopping both Ramatut and the Fantastic Four from leaving. However, they were brought back to the present by other means. Dr. Strange also succeeded in his own mission. At the same time, Apocalypse emerged from the Sphinx as the only survivor. While the Pharaoh's servants bowed before him, Apocalypse dismissed them as a weak and disgusting people, declaring he would return when the sands of the desert had buried them. After achieving many conquests over various galaxies and time periods, Kang the Conqueror returned to ancient Egypt, resuming his guise of Ramatut for a second reign. There, he found his loyal subjects still worshipped him, and he was welcomed back as ruler. In order to live out his final years in the antiquity of ancient Egypt, Ramatut destroyed his time machine. As the years progressed, there was a change in the rule of Ramatut, who began leading his people with virtue and compassion in mind. However, as time went on and he began thinking of his past mistakes, Ramatut decided to try to steer his past self away from his path to destruction. He devised means for him to slumber in an airtight sarcophagus to sleep away for over the 5,000 centuries needed to arrive at his desired time period. In 2920 BCE, Ramatut ingested the drugs that would put him in suspended animation. At the time, he was visited by the West Coast Avengers, who were visiting from the future. The Avenger Hawkeye asked Ramatut for help returning to their time. Slowly fading into unconsciousness, Tut informed the Avengers that he destroyed his time machine, but suggested they go back in time further to his first reign and seek a means of returning home from there. When Ramatut slipped into unconsciousness, the Avengers did just that. After 50 years, En-Sabah-Nur returned to his homeland, which by now was crumbling and soon to be overrun by its enemies, and mocked the people he used to know, as he was still as he had been years before. Nur would eventually discover the island of Okkara and its mutant civilization. He married Genesis, and the two led its thriving society with 4 children, 2 sons and 2 daughters, who eventually became their horsemen of apocalypse. Okkara was attacked by Annihilation, a dark god from the dark cold room that was driven to the hellish world of Amenth, where it became the ruler of its daemons. As it unleashed its horde of Amenthi daemons onto Okkara, it wielded the Twilight Sword, with which it split the island into 2 beings, Krakoa and Arako. Apocalypse and his horsemen fought a bloody war against the daemons. As the years passed and the war against Amenth still waged on, Apocalypse returned to Egypt accompanied by his children. In 2620 BCE, they joined forces with Egyptian warrior Imhotep and the Moon Knight of Khonshu to successfully fend off a brood invasion. This triumph served as the inspiration for 2 brotherhoods. The shield of Imhotep went west with the Brotherhood of the Shield, and Spear of Imhotep went east with the Hydra. With Apocalypse back on Okkara, Annihilation offered peace to the mutants, in terms spoken only to Genesis. The terms were refused, but it eventually became clear that the mutants would inevitably lose. In order to buy Earth time, a plan was concocted to seal off the half of Okkara gripped by the demons, along with Genesis, the Horsemen, and the remaining mutants of the island who would hold off the Amenthi hordes. Apocalypse was left behind, as he was deemed too weak to cross over. Before Genesis left for Amenth, she had Apocalypse promise to use the time they would buy him to shepherd mutant kind, to judge them, and to ensure that only the strongest survive, so that they would be prepared for when the demons inevitably returned. Khafre was an Egyptian king involved in the construction of the Sphinx circa 2500 BCE. He came to be in possession of the Claw of Bast and ordered to have it hidden. Upon his physical death, he had his soul placed into the Sphinx. The 23rd Ragnarok occurred, ending the Asgardian civilization. All of them were born again, from Thor to Loki, with slight differences. This incarnation of Thor had red hair. Gilgamesh became friends with the primitive Hulk Enkidu, and they had many adventures. By 1600 BCE, the city of Nineveh was conquered by the eldest spawn of the Mother of Horrors. After enslaving the population, she took a child as a host, but was faced by Enkidu, who was looking for a way to die. The eldest swiftly defeated him and took control of his body to free her mother. Moments before Eldest could free the Mother of Horrors, the one below all manifested itself and burned them with gamma flames, forcing the eldest to leave Enkidu's body. Enkidu burned the eldest and himself in the flames, killing them both. Upon learning of his friend's death, Gilgamesh contemplated mortality, as he was somehow unaware of his own eternal nature at the time. Around this time, Moses pleaded for every Hebrew doorpost to be marked with lamb's blood in order to protect the Israelite firstborn from the final plague Yahweh was going to bring on Ramses and on Egypt, the angel of death. The Asura were dispatched and were recounted in Exodus 1:13 as the angel of death. The void was also presented as having performed the deed. In 1291 BCE, the man known as Hercules couldn't control his own strength and beat several warriors in an act that led to war between Minia and Thebes. Through this, Hercules learned he was the son of Zeus. In 1289 BCE, Hercules sailed with the Argonauts led by Jason and saw the death of Medusa. In 1277 BCE, Eurystheus devised 12 labors for Hercules. While he was away, Heracles' father-in-law, Creon of Thebes, was killed to seize control of the city. When Heracles returned and learned of this, he was filled with bloodlust and accidentally killed his wife Megara and his 3 sons. When his sanity returned, Heracles' friends believed Hera must have placed a curse of bloodlust on him, and Heracles didn't correct them, too ashamed of the rage and lack of self-control he was afflicted with. He changed his name from the Greek Heracles to the Roman Hercules in order to distance himself from Hera and his deeds. He received instructions from the oracle in Delphi to complete the labors. By doing so, Hercules would not only pay for his crime, but also achieve immortality and take his rightful place among the Olympians. In 1264 BCE, King Laomedon of Troy employed Apollo and Poseidon to build impenetrable walls around his city, but once they were done, he refused to pay them. In response, they kidnapped his daughter. Laomedon asked Hercules to save his daughter, but after he was done, he refused to pay him as well. Hercules turned berserk, wreaking havoc in the city and killing Laomedon and all of his sons, save for Priam, who became the next king. Hercules' second wife, Deianira, found her husband cheating on her, so she poisoned him. Hercules' nephew, Iolaus, built a funeral pyre for Hercules, for him to end his suffering by throwing himself upon it. As his mortal body burned, his soul fell for 3 days into the depth of Tartarus. However, Zeus took pity on him and split the immortal part away from his body, allowing the shade to fall into the underworld. Now a full god, Hercules took his place as the god of strength. In an attempt to reconcile with Hera, he married Hebe. However, like his father, Hercules was a notorious ladies' man, despite a curse of Hera's that threatened any mortal woman with whom he became too involved. During Priam's reign, the Trojan War took place. Thor fought in it, as well as the eternal Ajax, who was mistaken for his demigod namesake. The eternal Macari was also present, and he was mistaken for the god Hermes. After the war, Greek hero Odysseus journeyed home for 10 years in the voyage known as the Odyssey. In his travels, he met the eternal Circe. She turned Odysseus' companions into pigs for attempting to menace her, but Odysseus resisted her witchcraft with the aid of the goddess Athena. Circe fell in love with Odysseus and transformed the pigs back into men. After they stayed on the island for 1 year, they left to continue their voyage. Later, Circe met Odysseus' son, Telemachus, in his voyage and romanced him. She considered him the love of her life. Later, Zeus created the artificial woman Pandora, who opened a box containing evil imps known as the Imp of Hatred, Imp of Forgetfulness, Imp of Sleepiness, Imp of Disease, Imp of Laziness, Imp of Fear, Imp of Paralysis, Imp of Foolishness, Fiery Imp, and Icy Imp. As Circe, the eternal Circe, imprisoned all the evils that escaped the box. In 776 BCE, Hercules took part in the very first Olympic Games, winning most of the events against a time-traveling Kang the Conqueror. In 625 BC, Rome was founded by the immortal mutants Romulus and Remus. Remus watched as her twin brother hid their mutant nature and concocted a fabricated myth in which they were leaders of an army of lupines, a prehistoric tribe that evolved from canines rather than primates, in an effort from Romulus to use the veil of falsehood to direct history from the shadows. By 332 or 330 BC, Egypt entered a new age, in which Apocalypse's children walked among them. Offspring of Nur received a portion of his power, those closest related having near identical abilities. Nur forged his clan, now called Clan Aqaba after his birthplace and those who had abandoned and left him to die. Egypt peaked, and so too did the clan's influence on the world. Over the ages, Apocalypse also often banded together the best human warriors from around the world to serve in his army of foot soldiers known as the Dark Riders, his group of fanatics devoted to his Darwinian ideals. Egypt was invaded by Persia, but that invasion was thwarted by Alexander the Great's own Macedonian invasion. Ensabah Nur turned on his Egyptian brothers that day, as they rallied to the Greeks instead of fighting both armies. This battle helped Noor winnow out the weak in its clan, and as Egypt became nothing but a distant memory to the clan's influence, Noor moved on to ancient Rome. In 300 BCE, Khonshu recruited a Roman gladiator to become his Moon Knight. During one battle, he confronted the Sun King, the avatar of his father Amun-Ra. He later executed the Sun King as Rome burned around him. He teamed up with the time-traveling Mark Spector when he was attacked by Kang the Conqueror when he came to the past looking for the magical artifacts of Khonshu. In 226 BC, the Greek inventor Archimedes, member of the Brotherhood of the Shield, piloted the Colossus of Rhodes to defend Rhodes against a Kree sentry. The robe of evil was a patch-worn garment that had apparently been created by the devil himself. After a first recorded appearance in Egypt circa 5000 BCE, it next resurfaced in 200 BCE Rome, owned by a tyrannical man named the Ruthless. Around 49 BCE, a time-traveling alien being who would centuries later be known as Charles Cotta arrived in ancient Rome to witness the history of Julius Caesar. He witnessed the Battle of Thapsus, where Caesar's 5th Legion repelled a charge of elephants of war. Caesar would have an accident while riding an elephant, resulting in his death before his appointed time. The alien feared that it was his presence that had altered the timeline, and so decided that in order to prevent a time paradox, he would continue Caesar's destiny by taking possession of Caesar's body, and becoming the conqueror Julius Caesar history would come to know to ensure that history continued on its course. In 44 BCE, on the Ides of March the 15th, the modern age's Fantastic Four time traveled to ancient Rome in order to witness Caesar's death, and learn from him his true nature of being an alien imposter rather than the original. They were soon arrested by the royal guards loyal to Marcus Brutus and to the Senate who conspired against Caesar. While the Fantastic Four were left to fend for themselves in the Colosseum, Brutus and his conspirators stabbed Caesar seemingly to death. The apparent murder was witnessed by two immortals, the immortal alien Mahayogi and a Neanderthal known as Kull, who lived as a Roman centurion at the time. Caesar survived thanks to his alien nature, and the Fantastic Four assisted in smuggling his body out of Rome. The alien thanked the Fantastic Four for their assistance and went out into the world to start a brand new life. In 5 BCE, the 24th Ragnarok occurred when Odin was slain by the Fenris wolf, followed by Thor, who died by the poison of Midgard's serpent. Ultimately, Asgard was burnt to a cinder by Surtur, leaving nothing of the old kingdom behind. There were survivors, such as that cycle's Balder, Odin's brothers, Vili and Ve, Odin's other sons, Vidar and Vali, the elder Hoder, and Thor's children, Magni and Modi. On the day Jesus of Nazareth was born in the town of Bethlehem, these last survivors of the last Ragnarok cycle began to recreate Asgard for the next cycle. Every Asgardian was born again, from Thor to Loki, with slight differences. Jesus' birth was accompanied by the Star of Bethlehem, which appeared before important events. The Magi, 3 aliens who followed the star, granted Jesus gifts. The calendar switched from BCE to CE to commemorate the birth of Jesus, son of Yahweh. Modern mutants would claim that Jesus was a mutant, but this was never proven. While Jesus lived, he was observed by the first vampire Varney and the immortal mutant who called himself the Sphinx, who was originally the chief wizard in the court of the Egyptian pharaoh Ramses.